The winter of 1987 arrived early in Ashford County, Montana, a place where the wind didn't just blow, it screamed through the valleys like something dying. By mid-November, frost had already claimed the grasslands, turning them into vast stretches of brittle yellow that crunched underfoot like broken bones. The sky hung low and gray, pregnant with snow that never seemed to fall, just threatening, always threatening. It was the kind of cold that seeped through walls and windows, the kind that made people lock their doors early and avoid eye contact at the grocery store. Ashford County had always been isolated, 3 hours from the nearest city, connected only by a 2-lane highway that truckers avoided after dark. But that winter, the isolation felt different, heavier, like the land itself was holding its breath. The town of Millbrook sat at the county's heart, if you could call it that. Population, 847, according to the faded sign at the town limits, though everyone knew that number was generous. Most of the young people had left years ago, chasing jobs in Seattle or Denver, leaving behind the elderly, the stubborn, and those with nowhere else to go. Main Street consisted of a post office, a diner with cracked vinyl booths, a hardware store that smelled of sawdust and rust, and Earl's Gas and Go, where the pump still had analog meters and the bathroom required a key attached to a hubcap. The local economy had collapsed in the early 80s when the lumber mill closed. The mine had shut down a decade before that. What remained was a community barely holding on, sustained by social security checks, small farms that produced more debt than crops, and the occasional tourist who took a wrong turn and needed directions back to civilization. But Millbrook had one thing that kept it on the map, one thing people still whispered about in neighboring counties, the Thornwood Estate. Everyone in Ashford County knew about Thornwood Manor. You couldn't not know about it. The mansion sat on a hill 3 miles outside Millbrook, visible from nearly every point in town, a massive Victorian Gothic structure with towers that clawed at the sky like accusing fingers. Even from a distance, even in broad daylight, there was something wrong about it. The proportions seemed off, the angles too sharp, the windows too dark, as if the building itself was watching you back. The estate had been built in 1889 by Silas Thornwood, a railroad baron who'd made his fortune in the chaos following the Civil War. The locals said he'd chosen this spot deliberately, far from prying eyes, far from the law, far from God himself. The mansion had 23 rooms, according to county records, though some said there were more hidden spaces that didn't appear on any blueprint. Silas had lived there for exactly 11 years before disappearing without a trace in 1900. His wife, Catherine, was found 3 days later in the basement, having hanged herself from a support beam. The local newspaper at the time, the Millbrook Gazette, reported that she'd left no note, but servants claimed she'd been heard screaming in the night, shouting about the door and what he kept behind it. After that, the house changed hands 17 times in 87 years. No family stayed longer than 3 years. No owner died of natural causes. The pattern was always the same. Initial excitement, months of renovation work, then sudden silence. Some families left in the middle of the night, abandoning furniture and belongings. Others left in ambulances or hearses. One owner, a banker from Helena named Douglas Pritchard, shot his entire family in 1956 before turning the gun on himself. The sheriff at the time ruled it a murder-suicide brought on by financial stress, but everyone in Millbrook knew better. Thornwood didn't let people leave peacefully. By 1987, the mansion had been vacant for 4 years. The bank had foreclosed on the previous owner, a young couple from California who'd lasted exactly 8 months before fleeing back west, claiming the house was alive and hungry. The husband had been institutionalized shortly after. The wife refused to speak about what they'd seen. The property sat in legal limbo, a liability no bank wanted, a curse no realtor would touch. The county tried twice to demolish it, but both times, the construction crews refused to finish the job. Equipment malfunctioned. Workers got hurt. One bulldozer operator swore he saw faces in the windows, watching him, even though the house had been empty for years. So Thornwood Manor remained, looming over Millbrook like a storm cloud that never moved. Michael and Sarah Hartwell had never heard of Thornwood Manor when they saw the auction listing in September 1987. Michael, 34, was a high school history teacher with thinning brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses that were always slightly crooked. He had the gentle, distracted manner of someone who lived more in books than in the present moment. His hands were soft, ink-stained, the hands of a man who'd never done hard labor. He had a habit of adjusting his glasses when he was nervous, which was often, and he spoke in long, winding sentences full of historical references that most people didn't understand or care about. Sarah, 32, was his opposite in almost every way. Where Michael was soft and bookish, Sarah was sharp and practical. She'd grown up on a farm in Nebraska, the daughter of a man who believed debt was a sin and comfort was weakness. She had her mother's honey-blonde hair, which she kept in a perpetual ponytail, and her father's grey-blue eyes that missed nothing. She'd worked as a nurse before their children were born, and she still moved with that efficient, no-nonsense energy of someone accustomed to emergencies and blood. They had 2 children, Emma, age 9, and Daniel, age 6. Emma was quiet and observant, the kind of child who seemed older than her years. She had Sarah's eyes, and a way of staring at people that made adults uncomfortable, as if she could see through their pleasantries to whatever darkness they were hiding. She carried a battered notebook everywhere, filling it with drawings of houses and trees and figures that never had faces. She rarely smiled. Daniel was the opposite, loud, energetic, constantly moving. He had Michael's unruly brown hair and a gap-toothed grin that could charm anyone. He collected rocks and bottle caps and asked endless questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? Where do dead people go? What's behind that door? Always questions, always moving, always making noise to fill the silence that Emma seemed to prefer. The Hartwells had been living in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Spokane, Washington, barely making ends meet on a teacher's salary and Sarah's part-time work at a medical clinic. They'd been looking for a house for years, something they could afford, something with room for the kids to grow. But every listing was either too expensive or too small, and their savings account never seemed to grow no matter how much they scraped and saved. Then Michael saw the auction notice in the back of a real estate magazine. Montana Estate Auction, Historic Victorian Mansion, minimum bid $1. $1. He'd laughed at first, thinking it was a typo or a scam. But the listing was legitimate, posted by Ashford County Bank and Trust. The fine print mentioned property sold as is and structural assessment recommended, but Michael barely read that part. All he saw was the photograph. A magnificent Victorian mansion with towers and wraparound porches, sitting on 47 acres of land. It's probably a dump, Sarah had said when he showed her. They're selling it for $1 because it's falling apart. Or it's a diamond in the rough, Michael countered, already imagining the possibilities. Sarah, look at this place. Even if we have to put work into it, we'd own it outright. No mortgage, no landlord. The kids could have their own rooms. You could have your garden. Sarah had studied the photograph for a long time, chewing her bottom lip the way she did when she was thinking hard. Where is it? Millbrook, Montana. About 3 hours from here. Never heard of it. That's because it's small, rural, quiet. Quiet usually means dying, Sarah said, but Michael could see her wavering. They'd driven out to see it on a cold Saturday in October, the 4 of them packed into their rust-spotted Toyota station wagon. The closer they got to Millbrook, the more isolated the landscape became. Trees gave way to grassland, which gave way to rolling hills of nothing. Daniel had fallen asleep in the back seat. Emma pressed her face to the window, watching the emptiness roll by. When they finally saw Thornwood Manor, rising from its hill like a crown of thorns, Sarah's breath had caught in her throat. Jesus, she whispered. The house was enormous, far bigger than the photograph had suggested. 3 stories of dark wood and stone, with a slate roof and 2 tower rooms that flanked the main structure like sentries. The windows were tall and narrow, most of them boarded up, giving the impression of closed eyes. The wraparound porch sagged in places, and the paint had long since peeled away, leaving bare wood the color of old bone. But beneath the decay, beneath the obvious neglect, the bones of the house were magnificent. The architecture was intricate, almost obsessive in its detail: carved corbels and finials, decorative shingles, elaborate gingerbread trim. Someone had built this house with pride and money. Lots of money. "It's a castle," Daniel breathed, suddenly awake. "It's haunted," Emma said quietly. "Don't be silly," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. They'd walked the property that day, Michael growing more excited with each discovery. The barn was still standing. There was a well house and what might have been servants' quarters. The land rolled away in every direction, private and peaceful. In the distance, they could see the town of Millbrook, small and quaint. "We could fix this up," Michael said. "I could do a lot of the work myself. Carpentry, painting. It's just cosmetic stuff, mostly." Sarah had turned to look at the house again. From this angle, with the afternoon sun hitting it just right, it almost looked welcoming. Almost. "When's the auction?" she asked. The auction took place on November 3rd, 1987, in the Ashford County Courthouse, a squat brick building that smelled of floor wax and old paper. Michael and Sarah had expected competition, maybe a dozen families or investors hoping to snag a bargain property. There were 3 people in the room besides themselves. One was a lawyer representing the bank, a thin man with a permanent frown who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The second was the county clerk, an elderly woman named Mrs. Esther Cook, who kept glancing at Michael and Sarah with an expression that might have been pity. The third was a local farmer named Harold Baines, who'd come, he said, just to watch. "Nobody wants that house," Harold had said, not unkindly. "Been trying to give it away for years." The auctioneer, really just a bank manager pressed into service, went through the formalities quickly, as if eager to be done with it. He read the property description in a monotone. Thornwood Estate, 47 acres, main house approximately 6,000 square feet, outbuildings included, sold as is, no warranty expressed or implied. "Do I hear $1? He asked, sounding bored. Michael raised his hand. $1 to the gentleman in the back, going once, going twice. The auctioneer's gavel fell. Sold for $1 to Michael Hartwell. It was done. Just like that. As they signed the paperwork, Mrs. Cook leaned close to Sarah and whispered, "You don't have to do this, dear. The bank would be just as happy to let it stand empty." "We need a house," Sarah said firmly. "There are other houses." "Not ones we can afford." Mrs. Cook had pressed her lips together, clearly wanting to say more. But ultimately she'd just slid the deed across the table and watched as Sarah signed her name. On their way out, Harold Baines caught up with them on the courthouse steps. "Listen," he said, his weathered face serious. "I don't know you folks, and maybe it's not my place, but you should know something about that house." "It needs work," Michael said. "We know." "It needs more than work," Harold said. "It needs—" He trailed off, searching for words. "Look, I've lived in Millbrook my whole life, 63 years. I've seen 17 families try to make a go of that place. None of them lasted. None of them left whole." "What do you mean, whole?" Sarah asked. Harold glanced back at the courthouse, then lowered his voice. "That house changes people. I don't know how else to say it. Good folks move in, and within months they're different. Angry, paranoid, or they just disappear, run off in the night. The Pritchards, you heard about them?" Michael nodded. He'd done research. Douglas Pritchard, 1956, murder-suicide. "Doug Pritchard was the gentlest man you'd ever meet," Harold continued. "Deacon at the church. Coached Little League. Then he moves into Thornwood, and 6 months later, he's killing his family with a shotgun." Harold shook his head. "That's not coincidence. That's the house. We don't believe in haunted houses, Michael said, though he said it gently. Didn't say it was haunted, Harold replied. Said it changes people. Maybe that's worse. He pulled a scrap of paper from his pocket and scribbled something on it. This is my number. You need anything at all, you call me. Don't try to be tough. Don't try to stick it out if things start feeling wrong. Sarah took the paper. Thank you. Harold nodded and walked away, his boots echoing on the courthouse steps. In the car, Daniel was bouncing with excitement. When can we move in? Can I have the tower room? Are there secret passages? Emma was quiet, clutching her notebook. What do you think, Em? Sarah asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. Emma looked up, her gray eyes serious. The house is sad, she said softly. Sad how? I don't know, just sad. And hungry. Sarah met Michael's eyes. He gave her a reassuring smile and reached over to squeeze her hand. It's just a house, he said. Wood and nails, nothing more. But as they drove back toward Spokane, Sarah found herself glancing in the side mirror, watching Millbrook disappear behind them. And for just a moment, on that distant hill, she could have sworn she saw lights in the windows of Thornwood Manor. Which was impossible, because there was no electricity. The power had been shut off 4 years ago. They moved in on November 15, 1987, under a sky the color of old bruises. The moving truck, really just a rental van packed with their meager belongings, rumbled up the long driveway, gravel crunching under the tires. The trees that lined the drive were bare, their branches reaching across like skeletal hands trying to weave a cage. Michael felt his excitement dimming slightly as they approached the house in daylight. It looked worse than he remembered, more decayed, more hostile. Several windows on the 3rd floor were broken, not just boarded up. The front porch sagged dramatically on the left side. What he'd thought were decorative stains on the wood were actually water damage, deep and pervasive. It's fine, he said aloud, as much to himself as to Sarah. Everything's fixable. They spent the afternoon unloading, carrying boxes and furniture through the massive front door into an entry hall that swallowed sound. The inside was worse than the outside, wallpaper hanging in strips, floorboards warped and stained, a smell of mildew and something else, something sweet and rotten that Michael couldn't identify. Emma refused to go upstairs. I don't like it up there, she said, standing at the base of the grand staircase, her notebook pressed against her chest like a shield. There's nothing up there, honey, Sarah said. But even she sounded uncertain. Daniel, predictably, had no such reservations. He'd spent the afternoon racing through the house, his footsteps echoing through empty rooms, his laughter bouncing off high ceilings. He'd claimed the North Tower room as his own, despite the broken window and the dead bird they'd found on the floor. As the sun began to set, early, so early this far north in November, the temperature dropped rapidly. They had no heat yet, no electricity. Michael had brought camping lanterns and sleeping bags. They'd camp out in the downstairs parlor until he could get the utilities turned on. They ate dinner by lantern light, sandwiches from a cooler, chips, lukewarm soda. The 4 of them sat on the floor in a circle, their small pool of light surrounded by vast darkness that seemed to press in from all sides. Tell us about the house, Dad, Daniel said through a mouthful of sandwich. Tell us the history. Michael launched into the story of Silas Thornwood, the railroad baron, making it sound like an adventure rather than a tragedy. Emma listened quietly, drawing in her notebook. Sarah cleaned up the dinner mess, her movements efficient but tense. Later, after the kids were zipped into their sleeping bags, Michael and Sarah sat together on the front porch, sharing a thermos of coffee and staring out at the darkness. What do you think? Michael asked. I think it's a lot of work. But we can do it, right? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Did you hear that sound earlier, when we were unloading? What sound? Like someone walking on the floor above us. Footsteps. It was probably the house settling, Michael said. Old houses make all kinds of noises. It didn't sound like settling. "Sarah, I know," she sighed. "I'm just tired. It's been a long day." They sat in silence, the cold creeping through their jackets. In the distance, they could see a few lights from Millbrook, tiny pinpricks in the vast darkness. "Michael," Sarah said quietly, "why do you think no one else bid on this place?" "Because they're superstitious. Because small-town people believe in ghosts and curses. Or because they know something we don't." Before Michael could answer, they heard it. A sound from inside the house. Not footsteps this time, but something else. A scraping sound, like wood on wood, followed by a soft click. A door, closing. They looked at each other in the lantern light. "Kids are asleep," Sarah whispered. "Probably just the wind." But there was no wind. The night was perfectly still. Michael stood up, grabbing his flashlight. "I'll check it out. I'm coming with you." They went back inside together, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. The parlor was undisturbed, Emma and Daniel still asleep in their sleeping bags, Emma's arm draped over her notebook even in sleep. They checked the kitchen, empty. The dining room, nothing. The library, clear. They were standing in the main hallway about to give up when Sarah grabbed Michael's arm. "There," she whispered, pointing. At the far end of the hall, barely visible in the darkness, was a door they hadn't noticed before. It was different from the others, made of heavier wood, painted black, with an old-fashioned iron lock. "Was that there before?" Sarah asked. I don't know. I don't think so." They approached slowly, their flashlight beams converging on the door. Up close, they could see scratch marks around the lock, deep gouges in the wood as if someone, or something, had tried to claw their way out. Or in. Michael tried the handle, locked. "We'll deal with it tomorrow," he said, his voice not quite steady. "Probably just a basement or storage room." But as they walked back to the parlor, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. And when she glanced back at the black door just for a second, she could have sworn she saw light seeping out from underneath it. A flickering, reddish light, like fire, or like something breathing. End of Chapter 1. Morning came reluctantly to Thornwood Manor, the sun rising pale and weak behind a veil of gray clouds that seemed to hover just above the roof. Michael woke to find frost on the inside of the windows, delicate patterns that looked almost deliberate, like someone had traced them with a finger. Beautiful and unsettling. Sarah was already awake, sitting up in her sleeping bag, staring at nothing. She had dark circles under her eyes. "Did you sleep?" Michael asked, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. "Not really." She turned to look at him, and he saw something in her expression he'd never seen before. Not quite fear, but something close to it. Unease. "I kept hearing things. All night. Footsteps, doors opening and closing, whispers." "The house settling," Michael said automatically. But even he didn't believe it anymore. "Michael, I'm a rational person. I don't believe in ghosts. But something is wrong with this house." Before he could respond, they heard Daniel's voice from upstairs, high and excited. "Mom! Dad! Come see what I found!" They exchanged glances, then quickly pulled on their coats and climbed the stairs. The staircase creaked with every step, and Michael noticed something he hadn't seen the day before. The wallpaper on the stairwell wall depicted a pattern of doors. Hundreds of tiny doors, all of them closed. The pattern repeated endlessly, climbing up the wall toward the second floor. Daniel was in his tower room, bouncing on his heels with excitement. Emma stood in the doorway, refusing to enter, her notebook clutched to her chest. "Look!" Daniel pointed to the wall behind where his bed would go. Someone had carved words into the wood. Deep, angry letters gouged into the wall with something sharp. "Don't open the black door below that," in different handwriting, shakier. "It never stays closed." And below that, in what looked like dried blood, "It's hungry." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Michael felt his stomach drop. Cool, right? Daniel said, completely missing the horror of it. It's like treasure map clues. What black door? The one downstairs, Emma said quietly. The one at the end of the hall. Michael turned to look at his daughter. How do you know about that? You didn't go down that hallway last night. Emma met his eyes with that unsettling, too old stare. I didn't have to go down there. I could feel it. All night. It was calling. Calling. Sarah's voice was tight. Not with words. It's hard to explain. Emma hugged her notebook tighter. It wants us to open it, but we shouldn't. We really, really shouldn't. Michael decided they needed supplies, tools, cleaning materials, food, and, most importantly, information about the house's utilities. He drove into Millbrook alone, leaving Sarah with the kids, promising to be back before lunch. The town looked even more desolate in daylight. Main Street was nearly empty, just a few pickup trucks parked at odd angles in front of the diner. As Michael walked toward the hardware store, he felt eyes on him. Curtains moved in windows. A woman sweeping the sidewalk stopped to stare at him, her broom frozen mid-sweep. Inside the hardware store, the owner, a heavy-set man in his 60s with a name tag that said Frank, looked up from his newspaper and his face went pale. "You're living in Thornwood," Frank said. It wasn't a question. "We just moved in yesterday. You need to leave." Frank put down his newspaper, his expression grave. "Pack up your family and get out while you still can. I appreciate your concern, but we're not going anywhere. We just bought the house. For $1. Frank shook his head. "Son, there's a reason that house cost $1. There's a reason nobody's lived there longer than a few years. That place is wrong. Has been since Silas built it." Michael felt his patience wearing thin. "Look, I'm a history teacher. I've done my research. Yes, the house has a tragic past. Yes, several owners have had problems. But I don't believe in curses or ghosts or whatever superstition. This ain't superstition." Frank came around the counter, his voice low and urgent. "My grandfather helped build that house in 1889. He was a carpenter, worked on the crew for 6 months. He told me stories before he died, stories that gave me nightmares as a kid and still do." Despite himself, Michael found himself leaning in. "What kind of stories?" "The basement," Frank said. "Silas Thornwood designed the house himself, brought in the architect from back east. But the basement, that was something different. Silas insisted on overseeing that construction personally. He'd be down there for hours, sometimes days, with just 1 or 2 workers he'd sworn to secrecy. My grandfather never went down there, but he heard sounds. Digging. Lots of digging. Going deeper and deeper. So he built a deep basement. That's not—" "They dug for 3 months," Frank interrupted. "You know how deep that is? How much earth you can move in 3 months with 10 men working round the clock. And here's the thing. When they finished, Silas had them seal it up. Poured concrete, installed a reinforced door, put a lock on it that took 3 different keys to open." Michael felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "The black door." Frank nodded slowly. "You've seen it then. Did you try to open it?" "It's locked. Keep it that way." Frank gripped Michael's arm. "Every family that's lived in that house, eventually someone tries to open that door. The Pritchards, Doug Pritchard, spent 3 weeks trying to break through it before he did what he did. The Simmons family before them. Their teenage son managed to get it open. He was found 3 days later in the woods, alive but catatonic. Never spoke another word. Died in the state hospital 10 years ago. What's behind the door?" "Nothing good." Frank released his arm. "Listen, I know you've got your family settled in. Probably can't afford to move again. But at least heed this warning. Stay away from that door. Don't try to open it. Don't even go near it. And if you hear sounds coming from behind it—" "What kind of sounds?" "Scratching, whispering, crying." Frank's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Or singing. If you hear singing, get your family out immediately. Don't pack. Don't grab anything. Just run." Michael left the hardware store with a bag of supplies and a head full of doubts. He told himself Frank was just a superstitious old man, that small-town people loved their ghost stories and local legends. But the specificity of the details bothered him. The basement, the digging, the sealed door. On impulse, he stopped at the Millbrook Public Library, a small building that looked more like someone's house than a library. Inside, it smelled of old paper and dust. An elderly librarian with thick glasses looked up from her desk. "Help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting she'd rather not. "I'm looking for information about Thornwood Manor. Historical records, newspaper articles, anything you have." The librarian, her name tag said, Mrs. Hendricks, studied him for a long moment. "You bought the house." Word traveled fast in small towns. "Yes, ma'am." She sighed heavily, then stood up with the slow, painful movements of someone with arthritis. "Follow me." She led him to a back room lined with filing cabinets and boxes of old newspapers. "We keep the Thornwood materials separate," she explained. "Too many people over the years looking for them. Curiosity seekers mostly. Ghost hunters. Idiots." She gave him a sharp look. "Which category are you?" "I'm just trying to understand the history of my house." "Your house." She pulled out a file box and set it on a table with a heavy thud. "This is everything we have. Newspaper clippings, county records, some personal letters that were donated over the years. Fair warning, it doesn't make for pleasant reading." Michael spent the next 2 hours going through the materials, and with each article, each record, each letter, his sense of dread grew deeper. The Millbrook Gazette, May 15th, 1900. Railroad baron vanishes, wife found dead. Silas Thornwood, prominent railroad magnate and local landowner, has disappeared under mysterious circumstances. His wife, Catherine, was discovered deceased in the basement of their estate. Sheriff Williams ruled the death a suicide, though several servants have reported unusual occurrences in the days leading up to the tragedy. A letter from a servant named Mary Poole, dated May 1900. "I can no longer remain in service at Thornwood Manor. What Mr. Thornwood has done in that basement is ungodly. The sounds that come from behind that black door. I cannot describe them without losing my mind. Mrs." Catherine tried to warn us, tried to tell us what her husband had discovered, but none of us listened. Now she's dead, and he's gone, and that door remains, and God help whoever opens it. A police report from 1923, when a family named Morrison owned the house, responding to reports of screaming at Thornwood Estate, found Mrs. Ellen Morrison in hysterical state, claims something came out of the basement. Husband James Morrison discovered unconscious in second-floor hallway. No evidence of intruder. Mrs. Morrison admitted to county hospital for observation. A diary entry from Douglas Pritchard, dated October 1956, just weeks before the murder-suicide. "I finally found the keys, all 3 of them. They were hidden throughout the house, one in the attic rafters, one behind a loose brick in the library fireplace, one buried in the garden." Why would someone hide them so carefully unless they were protecting something, or protecting people from something? Tomorrow, I'm going to open the door. I have to know what Silas Thornwood kept down there. I have to know what's been calling to me every night. That was Pritchard's last diary entry. 2 weeks later, he killed his family. Michael felt sick. He wanted to dismiss it all as coincidence, mass hysteria, shared delusion. But the pattern was undeniable. Every family, every tragedy. And always, it came back to that black door. When Michael returned to Thornwood Manor, he found Sarah in the kitchen trying to clean decades of grime off the counters. She looked up when he entered, and he could see she'd been crying. "What happened?" he asked. "Emma." Sarah set down her sponge. "She's been standing in front of that door all morning, just staring at it. I told her to come help me, to go play with her brother, but she won't move." She says it's talking to her. Michael's blood ran cold. Where is she now? Still there. Michael, I'm scared. She's not herself. They found Emma exactly where Sarah said, standing in the hallway, 5 feet from the black door, her notebook open in her hands. She was drawing furiously, her pencil moving in quick, frantic strokes. Emma, honey, Michael said gently. Come away from there. She didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge his presence. Michael approached slowly and looked over her shoulder at the notebook. What he saw made his breath catch. She'd drawn the door, but not as it appeared now. In her drawing, the door was open, revealing a descending staircase. The stairs went down and down and down, far deeper than any basement should go. At the bottom, barely visible in Emma's sketch, was a shape. Something large and dark and wrong, with too many angles and not enough form. And around the shape, Emma had written the same phrase over and over in tiny letters that filled every margin. It knows we're here. It knows we're here. It knows we're here. Emma! Sarah's voice was sharp with panic. Emma blinked, as if waking from a trance. She looked at her parents and tears began streaming down her face. I don't want to hear it anymore, she sobbed. It won't stop talking. It says it's been alone for so long. It says it's hungry. It says... She pressed her hands over her ears. Make it stop, Daddy. Please make it stop. Michael scooped her up, and she buried her face in his shoulder, her small body shaking with sobs. Over her head, he met Sarah's eyes. We need to open it, he said quietly. Are you insane? Sarah, whatever's behind that door, whether it's something real or just some kind of mass psychological phenomenon, we can't live like this. We can't let it terrorize our daughter. We need to open it, see what's actually there, and put this to rest. What if Frank was right? What if it's just an old basement? What if there's nothing down there but rats and mold and everyone's been building this up in their minds for 100 years? He shifted Emma's weight. I'm a rational man. I don't believe in monsters. I believe in facts. So let's get the facts. Sarah looked at the door, then back at her daughter, then at Michael. Finally, she nodded. How? It's locked. I'll get a locksmith from the next county, someone who doesn't know about the house's history. And if that doesn't work, then I'll break it down. The locksmith arrived 2 days later, a young man from Helena named Travis, who chain-smoked and listened to heavy metal on his van radio. He seemed utterly uninterested in the house's history or appearance, which was exactly what Michael wanted. Old lock, Travis said, examining the black door. Real old. Custom made, looks like. 3 keyholes. That's weird. Never seen that before. Can you open it? Michael asked. Can I open it? Brother, I can open anything. Travis grinned and pulled out his tools. The family watched from a safe distance, Sarah holding Emma, Daniel bouncing with barely contained excitement. Michael noticed that Emma had her eyes closed, her hands pressed over her ears even though there was no sound yet. Travis worked for 20 minutes, muttering to himself, trying different picks and techniques. Finally, there was a click, then another, then a third. Got it, Travis said triumphantly. He reached for the handle. Wait, Michael said. Let me. Travis shrugged and stepped back. Your house, man. Michael approached the door slowly. His hand was shaking as he gripped the handle. It was cold, colder than it should be, cold enough that it almost burned. Behind him, Emma whispered, Don't. Michael turned the handle and pulled. The door opened silently, smoothly, as if the hinges had been oiled yesterday instead of decades ago. Beyond it, exactly as Emma had drawn, was a staircase descending into darkness. Stone steps, worn smooth by countless feet, leading down into a blackness so complete it seemed solid. A smell wafted up from below, damp earth, rot, and something else, something sweet and chemical, and wrong. Travis peered into the darkness. You want me to check the wiring down there, or—" The door slammed shut, not slowly, not by itself. It slammed with such force that the entire house shook, pictures falling from walls, windows rattling in their frames. Travis stumbled backward with a startled curse. From behind the door came a sound, a long, low groaning that might have been wind or might have been something else, something that had lungs and vocal cords and had been waiting a very, very long time to use them. Then, footsteps. Coming up the stairs. Slow and deliberate. Getting closer. "Oh, Jesus," Travis breathed. "Oh, Jesus Christ." Emma was screaming, her hands still over her ears. Daniel had gone silent, his face pale. Sarah grabbed both children and pulled them back. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs, stopped. The doorknob began to turn. "Nobody move," Michael whispered, though he couldn't have said why. The knob turned fully. The door opened a crack, just an inch, maybe two. Through the gap, Michael could see darkness, but not the darkness of an empty basement. This was different, deeper, darker. The kind of darkness that wasn't just the absence of light, but the presence of something else. And in that darkness, something was breathing. Heavy, wet breaths. The sound of air moving through a throat that was too large, or too many, or not quite the right shape. The door opened another inch. Travis broke first. He ran for the front entrance, nearly falling over his toolbox, and didn't stop until he was in his van. They heard the engine roar to life, heard gravel spray as he peeled out down the driveway. Michael wanted to run too. Every instinct screamed at him to grab his family and flee, but he was frozen, staring at that widening gap, at the darkness beyond, at the shape he could almost see moving in the depths. Then Sarah's voice, steady despite her terror. "Michael, close it." He moved. Lunged forward and threw his weight against the door. It resisted for a moment, something on the other side pushing back, strong and determined. But then it gave way, slamming shut with another house-shaking boom. Michael turned the lock, all three mechanisms, his hands shaking so badly he could barely manage it. Silence. No more footsteps. No more breathing. Just the sound of his family's terrified panting and his own heart hammering in his chest. "We're leaving," Sarah said. "Right now. We're packing what we can, and we're leaving." "Sarah, don't." Her voice was steel. "Don't you dare try to rationalize this. Don't tell me it was the wind or the house settling or mass hysteria. We all saw that door move. We all heard whatever that was. We're leaving." Michael wanted to argue. Wanted to say they had nowhere else to go, no money for another place, that running away solved nothing. But looking at his daughter's tear-stained face, at his son's shocked silence, at his wife's justified fury, he knew she was right. "Okay," he said quietly. "We'll pack tonight. Leave in the morning." But even as he said it, even as they began gathering their belongings by lamplight, he couldn't shake one terrible thought. Would the house let them leave? They didn't sleep. How could they? Every sound made them jump, the wind against the windows, the house's ordinary creaks and groans, their own breathing. They kept the children close, all four of them together in the parlor, surrounded by their hastily packed boxes. Michael kept checking his watch. Midnight came and went, 1 a.m., 2. At 2:47 a.m., the lights went out. All of them, simultaneously. Every camping lantern, every flashlight. Not dying gradually, but extinguishing instantly, as if something had snuffed them out. The darkness was absolute. "Michael," Sarah's voice, tight with fear. "I'm here. Kids?" "Here," Emma whispered. "Here," Daniel echoed, his usual bravado gone. Then, from somewhere in the house, they heard it. Singing. A woman's voice, high and clear and beautiful, singing a lullaby in a language Michael didn't recognize. The voice echoed through the halls, through the walls, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "That's Catherine Thornwood," Emma whispered. "Silas's wife. She's warning us. Honey, that's not... She wants us to run. Before it's too late. Before midnight passes and the door... A sound interrupted her. The sound they'd all been dreading. The black door opening. Footsteps. Coming up from the basement. Not slow this time. Quick. Purposeful. Ascending the stairs with unnatural speed. "The car!" Michael hissed. "Now!" They ran for the front door, boxes forgotten, grabbing only what they could carry. Michael fumbled with the deadbolt, his hands shaking, while behind them, the footsteps reached the top of the basement stairs, reached the black door, emerged into the hallway. The deadbolt wouldn't turn. "It's stuck!" Michael yanked at it desperately. "Sarah, help me!" Together they pulled, but it wouldn't budge. The door had been unlocked just hours ago, but now it might as well have been welded shut. The footsteps were in the main hall now, getting closer. They could hear breathing again, that wet, wrong sound, and with it came a smell, rot and chemicals, and underneath it all, something that might have once been perfume, but had aged into something sickening. "Windows!" Sarah grabbed the kids and ran for the parlor window. Michael followed, picking up a chair to smash the glass. The chair bounced off harmlessly. He swung again, harder, not even a crack. "That's impossible," he breathed. "That's impossible, that's—" The footsteps stopped. In the doorway of the parlor, barely visible in the darkness, something stood. It was tall, too tall for the doorframe, having to bend to fit. The shape was almost human, but wrong in ways Michael's mind couldn't process. Proportions that didn't match, angles that shouldn't exist. A face that might have been beautiful once, but was now something else, something that hurt to look at. And it was smiling. "No," Sarah moaned. "No, no, no." The thing took a step into the room. Emma pulled away from her mother and stepped forward, her small frame placing itself between her family and the creature. "I'll go with you," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'll come into the dark. Just let them leave, please." "Emma, no!" Sarah lunged for her daughter, but Michael held her back, his heart breaking because he understood what Emma was doing, offering herself as a trade, a sacrifice. The thing tilted its head, considering. When it spoke, its voice was like grinding stone and breaking glass. Not enough. It raised one hand, too many fingers, too many joints, and pointed at each of them in turn. All stay, or all die. Choose." Emma looked back at her parents, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. It wants us here. It's always wanted us here. That's why we could buy it for $1. That's why." End of chapter 2.